Beju heard the thundering roar of the armies and shuddered between the Vanars on one side and the Ayodhyan army on the other, as well as the PF forces assembled here on the main royal avenues. The sound was deafening, like a thunder crack directly above. As the echoes faded away into the silent dawn, he glanced up at the seer's eye morosely. The slanting first light highlighted the Rajtaru held up by Maharaja Ramachandrane. It's Samrat Ramachandra now, remember, and limned it in dull golden light. A cheer rose from the throats of the PFs around him, and he raised his hand unhappily, pretending to join in. One never knew who was watching these days, and after witnessing what happened to those who seemed less than enthusiastic about displaying support for the emperor, he had decided to keep his objections private and his displays public. He even shouted the ubiquitous chant, Samrat Ramachandra ki Jai, along with the rest, almost fumbling over the first word, which had been Siyavar for so long rather than the recent Samrat that he had yet to grow accustomed to saying. It tripped awkwardly off his tongue. Emperor Ramachandra in place of Sita's husband Ramachandra. That amendment of the customary cheer pretty much summed up the change in Rama over the past 10 years and described all that he considered to have gone wrong with Ayodhya in the same decade. From his position in the midst of a large regiment of similarly attired Gramarakshaks, Beju could not see what the distant figures on the lofty lower were presently viewing, but he had heard the odd descriptions of the sheer size of the Vanar forces, and he had personally borne witness to the growing ranks of Ayodhyan regulars over the past year, and he could imagine the mind-numbing size of the two armies that now flanked Ayodhya. Those thundering cries had been like nothing he had ever heard before. An old Senapati had once said when Beju was but a young novice soldier, that while men stood and walked alone, they still counted as men. But the moment they banded together, they grew into a kind of beast. The greater the number of men together, the less human and more bestial they became. Until finally, when it became the size of a national army, its individual humanity was all but lost in the hive mind of the great majority. As the old craggy general had summed it up, an army has its own sense of morality, and that sense has very little to do with what you or I call dharma. Now, the greatest beast ever created stood outside the walls of Ayodhya, roaring a challenge. And the fact that it was on their side rather than some external enemy's side offered little comfort to Beju. Once awakened, the beast must be fed. It will be fed. And if it cannot find sufficient nourishment outside, it will eat its own home, family, and finally, itself. For such is the nature of the beast, that slouching shambling monster that men become when they go to war. It needs no reason, for war itself is against all reason. It merely needs to be unleashed. And then the massacre begins. The old veteran's words still rumbled in the caverns of memory. Beju shuddered again. A little while later, after the assembly was over and the Samrat and the others from the seers had descended once again into the bowels of the palace, during the brief respite before the yajna itself was scheduled to start, Beju was standing by his wagon, checking that all was in readiness. The task of the Gramarakshaks was to bring up the flanks and rear, providing an unbroken supply chain that led back from the front lines all the way to Ayodhya. To this end, his Gramavas sparsely manned, just the minimum number required to drive the wagons and load and unload. They were all over the hill, old or partially incapacitated PFs deemed unfit to fight or march or ride along with the regular army. And they carried only supplies. In Beju's case, that meant mostly weapons of all kinds. 2 wagons were filled with only arrows, some so freshly fletched and leaded he could smell the bird shit on the feathers and the smelting on the iron tips. The other wagons carried an assortment of every kind of device or tool that could accomplish the brutal business of killing and sundering human beings. He supposed it was better than having to carry food provisions, like old Nachiketa's grama, or Veds to administer to the wounded on the field like Jagannath's grama. He sighed as he resecured a loose binding and flicked the flap of the wagon down again, hooking it deftly to prevent it flapping up as they rode. It was hard to believe that these weapons and tools of war would be used against fellow Aryas, against fellow humans, for that matter. All their lives, old soldiers like Beju had prayed to their chosen Amsas or avatars of the one god, in his case that had been Shaneshwara, his family's patron deity, that someday they would annihilate the Asura races from the mortal realm, restore peace and usher in a new era of contentment and prosperity. And look at us now, he thought as he walked around the large dusty field where dozens of other Gramas were similarly awaiting the order to move out. We annihilated the Asura races at last. Restored peace. We even achieved the prosperity part of the bargain. But then, instead of being content with that, we are about to start the whole vicious cycle of violence all over again. Except that this time, since we don't have a common non-human enemy to fight, we are just going to make do and slaughter one another. It made him sick to the stomach to even think of the countless men and women who had died over the decades, centuries even, so that the Arya civilization could attain its present level of stability and prosperity. Was it all for this? This miserable sodding relaunch of the same old madness all over again? What the bloody hell for? Angry and impotent, he kicked a loose stone and winced as it narrowly missed hitting the foot of another Gramarakshak. The man glared at him as if he was insane, and Beju raised a hand in sheepish apology. The mood across Ayodhya was taut as a bow pulled to its maximum stretch, as it usually was before any campaign, and the last thing he needed was to get into a brawl. The other Gramarakshaks regarded him with barely disguised hostility, not the least because of his Kalia high office and closeness to the late King Dashratha, as well as his fame as a Vajra captain, hero of many legendary exploits. They knew he was too good for this post and resented his presence among them. And they were justified in their resentment. After all, he wasn't here because he enjoyed inhaling the dust of the road and watching the hindquarters of a team of horses twitching tails for 50 yojnas every day. He was here because he had been kicked down here to this position, courtesy of Pradhan Mantri Jabli and his cronies. Not just he. Much the same fate had befallen most of those old vets who had enjoyed the trust of the late Maharaja. Dashratha had tolerated Jabli because of his efficiency and his old ties to Kosal nobility. He had never made a secret of his personal dislike of the man and his personal habits and beliefs. After Dashratha, and more importantly, after Pradhan Mantri Sumantra's resignation on grounds of dharma, War Minister Jabli had swept the royal house clean of all those who had been in the late king's favor, replacing them with his own cohorts. It was typical transition politics, and Beju understood it well. What he didn't understand, and found increasingly difficult to tolerate, was the growing hawkishness of Jabli's administration, and Rama's growing espousal of that hawkishness. And today, all his fears had been proven true. He stopped and looked around listlessly. He had reached the end of his grammar, and everything that could be checked had been checked twice or thrice. There was nothing left to do except wait for the order to roll out. He was bitterly unhappy about having to participate in the coming campaign. This is not what I signed up for 40 years ago. And this is not what Ayodhya is supposed to use its power and military might for. Shaneshwara cursed that hawk-nosed fool and his cronies. I warrant they're the ones who poisoned Rama's ear until he finally agreed to this madness. He suddenly felt defiant. What if he simply refused to take the grama out? If he just resigned his commission and walked away? But then again, what good would that do? It would make no difference to this massive war machine that had already been set into motion. The only one it would affect was old Beju himself. Military service was now compulsory in Ayodhya. Refusal or resignation or going absent without leave was tantamount to treason under the new interpretation of Manu's laws. And the danda for such an act of defiance was execution. He would be arrested for treason and probably be executed summarily, like the handful of other protesters or dissenters who had found the Ashwamedha campaign beyond their limits of tolerance. His body would still be warm as the other Gramas trundled out onto the Rajmarg, and he could almost imagine the other Gramarakshaks sneering or even spitting on his cooling corpse as they passed by. He sighed and rubbed his chest. No, a futile protest was no good to anyone. He may as well go along, do his duty, serve his time. At least he was not expected to participate directly in the brutality. He leaned morosely against the side of his lead wagon, mulling over the unfairness of it all. So distracted was he by his own thoughts that he failed to raise his head even when he heard a wagon approach. He hardly noticed even when the wagon stopped close by and the horses snickered quietly. A voice spoke from the wagon. A voice he had not heard in Shaneshwara knew how many years, decades. A voice from a distant, happier past. So tell me, Vajra Captain Beju, have you danced with any Vitals lately?